A humble girl marries a billionaire who is paralyzed, but on the wedding day she runs away because she cannot face the shocking truth. Aurora Zarani pressed her phone tightly against her ear, her mother's voice sharp and clipped. "Aurora, this is not negotiable. You're 30, for heaven's sake. You should at least meet him." Aurora leaned her head against the bus window, watching the streets of Shaw blur past. "I'm not coming to the matchmaking dinner, Mama. I've told you this 100 times." There was a sharp inhale on the other end, followed by a loud click as her mother ended the call. Aurora sighed and slipped her phone into her bag. Outside, the evening sun cast a golden glow over the city, but inside she felt a growing weight. At 30, love was no longer an exciting possibility. It was an expectation. Her parents' anxiety about her single status was palpable, a constant hum in her life. But Aurora had always believed love should be serendipitous, like the stories she loved reading as a teenager. Her own experience with love was fleeting. A single tender relationship in her university years, which had ended before it could deepen. Since then, she had thrown herself into helping others, certain love would find her when she least expected it. The bus stopped near a cultural center where tonight's charity gala was being held. Aurora stepped off, her heels clicking against the pavement. Despite her resolve, she couldn't shake the thought that her beliefs about love were beginning to feel naive. The center was buzzing with activity when she arrived. Layla, her coworker, waved her over, her voice frazzled. "Aurora, thank God you're here. We've got a problem. The upstairs venue isn't wheelchair accessible. We need to move everything to the ground floor." The two women worked tirelessly to reorganize the event, their plans upended at the last minute. By the time they were done, Aurora was exhausted, her feet ached, and her eyelids drooped, but the gala was finally ready. As the event began, Aurora slipped out of the crowd, seeking a quiet corner to catch her breath. She made her way toward the main doors, her arms full of files for the auction later that evening. Her fatigue caught up with her, and before she realized it, she collided with the door. The files slipped from her hands, scattering across the polished floor. She crouched to gather them, but the guests around her barely noticed. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a wheelchair approach. A young man with an easy smile bent down and handed her a sheet of paper. "Here, I think this belongs to you." Aurora looked up and froze. His expression was calm, his eyes steady and warm. For a moment the chaos around them seemed quiet. He smiled and wheeled away before she could say thanks. Aurora stood there for a moment, clutching the papers to her chest. There was something about him, something magnetic. Throughout the evening, Aurora found her eyes drifting toward him. The young man moved through the crowd with ease, chatting with guests, his wheelchair blending seamlessly into the room. What struck her wasn't his disability, but the way he carried himself. There was a quiet confidence about him, a steadiness that drew people in. His laugh, warm and unguarded, resonated above the chatter. Aurora tried to focus on her tasks, but curiosity tugged at her. Who was he? How had he come to attend tonight's gala? She caught herself stealing glances, embarrassed at her inability to keep her focus. As the night wound down, Aurora found herself once again adjusting auction items at the back of the hall. She didn't notice him approaching until his voice broke the silence. "You've been working non-stop tonight," he said. Startled, Aurora turned to find the young man sitting a few feet away, his smile disarming. "It's part of the job," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Well, it doesn't go unnoticed. It's rare to see someone so dedicated," he said, his tone sincere. Aurora finally smiled back. "Anyway, thank you. That's kind of you to say." For the next few minutes they talked, their conversation flowing easily. She learned his name, Abdullah Al-Farsi. He spoke about his love for community work and how he believed small actions could lead to big changes. He was smart, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny. Aurora found herself laughing at his dry humor, forgetting her exhaustion. She told him about her own passion for helping others, about the long nights spent organizing events like this. As the crowd began to thin, Abdullah glanced at the time. "It's getting late, but I hope this isn't the last time we talk." Before she could respond, He reached into his pocket and handed her a small card with his number. Aurora hesitated for a moment but took it. As she watched him wheel away, her heart felt lighter, the weight of the evening momentarily forgotten. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder if fate had finally decided to intervene. In the days that followed, Aurora found her thoughts drifting to Abdullah more often than she expected. There was a warmth about him that lingered in her mind, a kind of glow that made her smile whenever she remembered their conversation. Yet amid that growing fondness, she couldn't ignore a small voice in the back of her mind. Abdullah used a wheelchair. It was something she had never encountered before in a romantic sense, and the thought stirred mixed feelings. Would it change things? Could she handle what might come with it? These questions swirled in her thoughts, leaving her unsure. But despite her hesitations, Aurora couldn't deny the connection she had felt that night. On an impulse, she sent Abdullah a text. His reply came almost instantly, and soon they had arranged their first official date. When the day arrived, Aurora's nerves felt raw. Her mind raced with worries. Would they find it awkward? Would people around them stare? But when Abdullah greeted her at the bustling cafe in Cher with his radiant smile, every doubt vanished. The hours seemed to slip away as they talked. They shared stories and traded laughter, finding common ground in the most unexpected places. With Abdullah, Aurora didn't feel like she was with someone who was different. She felt like she was with someone she could genuinely connect with, someone she might even fall in love with. Their bond only deepened over the following weeks. Aurora came to understand that Abdullah's disability wasn't the defining feature of his identity. In fact, when they were together, it rarely crossed her mind. What mattered to her was the way he made her feel, his gentleness, his ability to listen so intently, and his knack for making her laugh like no one else ever had. She began to see Abdullah not as a man in a wheelchair, but as Abdullah, thoughtful, funny, and endlessly kind. Yet even as her feelings for him grew, Aurora couldn't fully quiet the small voice of doubt within her. She wondered about their future together. Would life with Abdullah present challenges she wasn't prepared for? How would others perceive their relationship? Was she truly ready to embrace all that it might entail? One evening, as the vibrant hues of sunset painted the sky, Aurora and Abdullah sat on a bench at Allah's waterfront, watching the calm waters shimmer in the fading light. The atmosphere was serene, but Aurora's heart was heavy with unspoken thoughts. She took a deep breath and decided it was time to be honest. "Abdullah," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I care about you. I really do. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. I've never been in a relationship like this before." Abdullah turned to her, his expression calm, yet curious. "You mean because of my wheelchair?" he asked gently, without a trace of judgment. Aurora nodded, guilt pooling in her chest. She avoided his gaze, afraid of hurting him with her honesty. But Abdullah didn't flinch. Instead, he reached for her hand, his touch firm, yet reassuring. "I understand," he said quietly. "It's not something everyone is used to, and I know this isn't easy. But Aurora, I don't want you to love me despite this chair. I want you to love me for who I am, with or without it." His words struck her deeply, piercing through her doubts and fears. She looked up at him, meeting his steady gaze. In that moment, Aurora realized how deeply she truly cared for him. He wasn't just a man with a disability. He was Abdullah, the man who made her laugh, who saw her for who she really was, who brought a sense of joy and peace into her life she hadn't known she needed. Tears pricked her eyes as she whispered, "I do, Abdullah. I love you for exactly who you are." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the world bathed in twilight, Aurora felt a newfound certainty settle in her heart. This wasn't about challenges or perceptions anymore. It was about the man beside her, the one who had shown her that love in all its complexities was worth every risk. His disability wasn't what defined him. It was simply one part of him, like the warmth in his voice or the spark in his eyes. After their heartfelt conversation, the doubts lingering in Aurora's mind began to melt away. Their bond deepened, and before long, Abdullah was down on one knee, proposing to her in Almaz Park, the very place where they'd first shared their souls. With tears in her eyes and her heart brimming with joy, Aurora said yes. The wheelchair didn't matter anymore. What mattered was Abdullah, the man she wanted to build her life with, the one who had become her everything. Their journey hadn't been typical, and it certainly wasn't without its hurdles, but it was genuine. It was theirs. Aurora was elated. She had said yes to her soulmate Abdullah, and now they were preparing for the biggest day of their lives, their wedding. She envisioned walking down the aisle, saying her vows, and promising to stand by him forever. The planning consumed her with excitement, choosing the perfect dress, picking a venue along the Shah Corniche, arranging vibrant bouquets of jasmine and lilies. Every detail felt like part of a dream coming true. But not everyone shared her enthusiasm. At first, Aurora's family and friends had shown their support, praising her selflessness and kind heart. They saw how deeply Abdullah made her happy. But as the wedding drew closer, whispers of doubt began to surface. Subtle but persistent questions emerged. Was this the right choice? Could love alone be enough? One evening, as Aurora sat at her parents' home sipping mint tea, her mother finally voiced what had been on everyone's mind. "Sweetheart, are you absolutely certain about this?" "Of course I know his family's rich," her mother asked, her voice gentle but edged with concern. Aurora's stomach tightened. "Mom, what do you mean? I love Abdullah, not his family." Her mother set her teacup down with a quiet sigh. "I know you do, Aurora, but marriage is a lifelong commitment, and marrying someone with a disability—" Her voice trailed off. "It's not going to be easy. You have to think about what your future might look like." The knot in Aurora's chest tightened. She had heard similar comments from a few friends, but hearing them from her mother stung differently. "Abdullah being in a wheelchair doesn't change who he is," Aurora replied firmly, though a flicker of doubt crept into her voice. "He's still the man I fell in love with. Why does everyone act like that's not enough?" Her mother's expression softened, but her words carried a weight that was hard to dismiss. "It's not just the wheelchair, honey. It's everything that comes with it. Are you ready for that kind of responsibility? What if his health declined? What if you have to care for him in ways you're not prepared for? I just don't want you to feel overwhelmed or trapped later." That night, Aurora lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mother's words looping endlessly in her mind. She had always known that being with Abdullah might bring challenges, but she had never let those thoughts take root. Now, with the wedding just weeks away, the fears she had buried started to rise uninvited and insistent. "What if Mom's right?" she whispered to herself in the dark. "What if I'm not strong enough? What if things get too hard?" Her love for Abdullah had always been a source of strength, filling her with hope and warmth, but now the doubts swirling around her felt like an unwelcome shadow, casting a pall over what should have been the happiest time of her life. Could their love truly endure whatever obstacles might come their way? In the days that followed, Aurora pushed herself to focus on the excitement of wedding preparations, drowning her worries in the flurry of plans. But the whispers of doubt weren't confined to her family. The undercurrent of skepticism reached her friends, acquaintances, even strangers who felt compelled to weigh in. Each quiet remark chipped away at her resolve, leaving her to wonder, was love enough? Could it truly overcome everything? One afternoon, while Aurora was having lunch with her closest friends at a small cafe in Charar, Leah, her best friend, leaned forward with a serious expression. "Aurora, we love you and we adore Abdullah, but are you truly happy? I mean, he's the only son of the powerful Alari family. They own an oil logistics company in the UAE. But..." Aurora paused mid-bite of her falafel wrap, startled by the abrupt shift in the conversation. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with defensiveness. Layla hesitated, her eyes darting between their friends for support. "It's just, we worry about you. You're always so giving, always putting everyone else ahead of yourself. We just want to make sure this is what you want, not something you feel you have to do." Setting her wrap down, Aurora sighed, her appetite gone. "Of course it's what I want," she said firmly, though her voice betrayed a slight tremor. "Abdullah makes me happy. Isn't that the point?" Yasmin, another friend, joined in. "Of course it is, Aurora. But this is your whole life we're talking about. Have you really thought about what it'll be like when things get tough?" Later that night, Aurora sat alone in her cozy apartment, the skyline of Chara glittering beyond the window. Her gaze fell on a small stack of wedding invitations still waiting to be sent. Their earlier conversation lingered, leaving a bitter taste. It was as though everyone believed she was making some grand sacrifice by marrying Abdullah, that her love for him was somehow tied to pity or obligation. But Aurora knew that wasn't true. Yes, Abdullah had a disability, but it wasn't what defined him. He was compassionate, intelligent, and endlessly funny. He had a way of grounding her when her anxiety spiraled, of making her laugh even on her darkest days. She closed her eyes and let memories of their time together wash over her. She thought of the quiet afternoons they'd spent at Al Maj's waterfront, where he'd held her hand as she confessed her deepest fears. She remembered the twinkle in his eyes during their late-night conversations about life and dreams. Her love for Abdullah was real, deeply real. It wasn't about sacrifice. It was about connection, partnership, and joy. People saw his wheelchair and assumed the worst, but they couldn't see what she saw, a man who radiated strength and kindness. Taking a deep breath, Aurora steeled herself. She wouldn't let doubts, hers or anyone else's, cloud her decision. Yes, there would be challenges. Every marriage faced its share of obstacles. What mattered was that she and Abdullah loved each other and were ready to face the future together as equals. On the day of the wedding, Aurora sat before a large mirror in a room at the venue, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. Her dress, a stunning piece of ivory lace with intricate beadwork, hung neatly on a rack nearby. It was perfect, the dress she'd always imagined. "Aurora, are you ready?" Layla called from the adjacent room. Aurora's lips twitched into a faint smile. Layla had been a steadfast companion throughout the preparations, even after voicing her concerns. "Almost," Aurora replied softly, her fingers tracing the delicate lace of the dress as she glanced at herself in the mirror. She told herself she was ready, but the weight of the moment loomed large. In just a few short hours, she would be walking down the aisle to Abdullah. As Layla helped her into the dress, Aurora's mind wandered to the ceremony. She knew the room would be packed, family, friends, and well-wishers. Some had been supportive from the start, thrilled to see Aurora so happy, but others, distant relatives and acquaintances, still harbored doubts. She could almost hear the murmurs that would undoubtedly ripple through the crowd. Is she sure about this? How will it work in the long run? But Aurora pushed those thoughts aside. Today wasn't about them. It was about her and Abdullah, about the love they shared and the life they were building together. With her veil in place, Aurora took one last look in the mirror. She didn't just see a bride. She saw a woman who had found a love worth fighting for. At the venue, the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. Guests filled the seats, their whispers and laughter filling the air. Some had never met Abdullah before and were curious to see the man who had captured Aurora's heart. Others who knew him well admired the strength of their relationship. "I just hope she knows what she's doing," a distant cousin whispered to her companion. "From what I've heard, he's a good man," the companion replied. "Maybe that's all that matters." Amid the hum of voices, Abdullah waited in the wings, calm and composed. For him, this wasn't just a wedding. It was a testament to the love they had built together, a love that had weathered doubt and emerged stronger. And as the ceremony drew closer, both Aurora and Abdullah knew that this day wasn't just the beginning of their marriage. It was a declaration to the world that love, in all its forms, was worth everything. As composed as anyone could be on their wedding day, Abdullah sat in his wheelchair near the front of the Grand Hall of Al-Noor Mosque in Sharar. He appeared calm, almost serene, his sharp suit perfectly fitted and his eyes glimmering with a quiet joy. Unlike Aurora, he wasn't preoccupied with the fine details or the judgments of others. This day wasn't about anyone else. It was about him and the woman he loved. That was enough. Abdullah had faced enough struggles in his life to understand that doubt was a constant companion. But through it all, he had learned to hold on to what mattered. And today, what mattered was Aurora. He knew deep in his soul that her love for him was as steadfast as his for her. That certainty kept him grounded even under the immense weight of this life-changing day. The soft hum of conversations floated around him. Some voices were encouraging, others curious, a few even skeptical. Abdullah caught the occasional side glance or whispered remark, but those were easy to ignore. He had long since stopped trying to prove himself to others. Today wasn't about earning anyone's approval. It was about committing himself to the woman who had brought a profound light into his life. In a nearby preparation room, Aurora adjusted her lace-trimmed gown, the intricate beading shimmering under the soft golden light. She exhaled deeply as her father entered, his eyes moist with pride and emotion. "You look stunning, sweetheart," he said, his voice tender but steady. "Thank you, Dad," she replied, offering him a small, nervous smile. But her hands fidgeted with her veil as uncertainty crept into her expression. "Do you think I'm making the right choice?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father paused, taking a step closer. "Aurora," he began gently. "I'll admit, at first I wasn't sure. I had my reservations, just like some others. But then I watched the way Abdullah looks at you. It's like nothing else in the world matters when you're in the room. And more importantly, I see the way you look at him. That's all I need to know." Aurora's chest tightened, tears welling up in her eyes. She nodded, gripping her father's hand tightly. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice quivering with emotion. "I love him so much." "I know you do," he said, a warm smile spreading across his face. The melodic strains of the oud began to fill the hall, signaling it was time. Aurora took her father's arm, her pulse quickening as they stepped into the mosque's grand hall. The guests turned in unison, their whispers swelling before giving way to silence. The moment felt surreal. The aisle, adorned with delicate jasmine garlands, seemed impossibly long, and Aurora's legs trembled slightly as she walked. But then her eyes locked with Abdullah's, and the world fell away. He waited for her at the end of the aisle, calm and steady as always, his gaze filled with a love so profound it steadied her nerves. As she reached him, and their hands met, Aurora felt her heart soar, the culmination of everything she had dreamed of unfolding before her. The air was heavy with emotion as the imam began the ceremony, reciting verses in a voice that resonated through the ornate hall. Aurora's heart raced, but something began to feel off. Abdullah, who had always been her pillar of certainty, looked different. Behind his calm exterior, there was a flicker of something else, a shadow of hesitation. Her stomach tightened as she studied his expression. Before she could whisper her concern, Abdullah gave her hand a gentle squeeze. She felt the slight tremor in his fingers, and her unease deepened. Just as the imam was about to begin the vows, Abdullah inhaled deeply, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Aurora, wait," he said, the words soft, yet weighted, breaking the sacred silence of the room. The crowd stirred, murmurs rippling through the rows of seated guests. Aurora's heart skipped a beat, her mind swirling with unanswered questions. "What's happening?" she thought, her breath catching in her chest. Abdullah swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on hers with a mixture of guilt and determination. "Before we go any further," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to say. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago." Abdullah's words were quiet, almost drowned out by the murmur of the gathering. Aurora's breath hitched. "Abdullah, what are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling, barely above a whisper. A knot of unease tightened in her chest. Abdullah hesitated, his eyes shifting toward the guests mingling behind them before returning to her. "I'm not who you think I am," he said softly, regret heavy in his tone. "I'm not actually disabled." The words struck Aurora like a thunderclap. Her legs wavered beneath her and her thoughts blurred, unable to piece together what she had just heard. "What? What?" she managed, her voice faint. "What do you mean?" The room seemed to still, the hum of conversation fading as if the air itself had been sucked away. All eyes turned toward them, yet Aurora felt as though she and Abdullah were the only two people in the world. Abdullah's gaze bore into hers, his expression pleading. "I'm not really disabled," he repeated, his voice steadier now, though still tinged with remorse. "I've been pretending." A gasp rippled through the hall, echoing like a wave through the majestic space of the mosque. Aurora could feel the weight of every stare, but she didn't care. All she could see was Abdullah, the man she thought she knew, the man she had let into her heart. Her voice trembled as she demanded, "Why? Why would you do something like that?" Abdullah took a deep breath, his focus unwavering. "I needed to know if someone could love me for me," he explained, his words deliberate. "Not for my appearance, not for my wealth, not for anything superficial. I wanted to find someone who would love me for who I truly am." Tears began to well in Aurora's eyes, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You lied to me this whole time." Abdullah's face crumpled, guilt edged deeply into his features. "I never meant to hurt you, Aurora," he said earnestly. "I didn't know another way to find real love. So many people have taken advantage of me, for what I have, for the life I can give them. I couldn't take it anymore." He lowered his gaze, shame shadowing his face. "When I met you, I saw something different. Your kindness, your selflessness. I wanted to know if someone like you could love me without knowing about my money, or that I could walk. I had to know." The room had fallen completely silent. Even the guests seemed to hold their breaths, captivated by Abdullah's confession. Aurora's mind raced, her emotions tangled in a storm of hurt, anger, and lingering love. The man she cared for had deceived her, built their relationship on a foundation of lies. Yet despite everything, her feelings for him hadn't simply vanished. "You should have trusted me," she said, her voice breaking as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "You should have told me the truth from the start, Abdullah. I loved you. I loved you for you. Not for your wheelchair, not for your money. But now I don't even know what's real." Abdullah reached out, his hands trembling as they hovered over hers, his eyes brimmed with sorrow. "Aurora," he murmured, "I know I hurt you, and I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for that. But I promise you, the man you fell in love with, that's who I truly am. The wheelchair doesn't define me. It never has. I had to know your love was genuine." Abdullah's voice cracked, his desperation tangible. Aurora stepped back, her hands slipping from his grasp as if his touch burned. Her thoughts spiraled, her breath shallow. The ground beneath her seemed to shift, unsteady as her world began to unravel. How could the man she had trusted so completely betray her in this way? The murmurs from the gathered crowd swelled, filling the room like a tide. Some onlookers exchanged scandalized glances, their outrage plain, while others whispered in hushed tones, attempting to piece together the fragments of this broken moment. "Aurora!" Abdullah pleaded, his voice trembling with urgency. "I love you. That love, that's the only truth. Everything else, it was wrong, I know, but my love for you has always been real." Aurora's gaze locked onto his, searching for an answer, a shred of honesty amidst the wreckage of his lies. Her chest tightened as the silence between them grew unbearable, her heart torn between love and betrayal. Finally, she inhaled deeply, summoning strength she didn't feel. Her voice was low but steady, a faint tremor betraying her inner turmoil. "Abdullah," she said, her words measured, "I need time. I need to think." Without another word, Aurora turned and walked quickly down the aisle, her tears spilling freely as her mind raced. The ornate arches of the Sharer Mosque blurred around her, the golden light of the chandeliers seeming cold and distant. Her chest felt heavy, her breaths labored as though she were drowning in the weight of her pain. The man she thought she knew, the man she loved, had built their relationship on deceit. She had given him everything, her trust, her heart, and now it all felt like an illusion. Her hands trembled as she pushed open the door to a small room behind the main hall, shutting herself inside. Leaning against the wall, Aurora fought to catch her breath. Her thoughts swirled in a chaotic storm. How could Abdullah do this? How could he pretend to be someone he wasn't? She had loved him for the man he was, not his wheelchair, not his circumstances, and certainly not his wealth. And yet this revelation left a bitter taste, casting a shadow over everything they had shared. Her knees buckled as she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "What do I do?" She whispered to no one, her voice breaking under the weight of her heartbreak. She loved Abdullah. She couldn't deny that. But the betrayal cut so deeply she wondered how she could ever rebuild the trust he had shattered. Back at the front of the hall, Abdullah stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the door Aurora had disappeared through. The air was thick with tension, the room eerily silent apart from the shifting feet and quiet coughs of the stunned guests. Abdullah's heart ached with every beat. He had hurt the woman he loved more than anyone in the world, and the realization gutted him. He hadn't meant for it to happen like this. He hadn't wanted to deceive her, not really. He only wanted to know that someone could love him for who he truly was, beyond the wheelchair, beyond his family's wealth. He'd thought he was protecting his heart, but now he saw the damage he'd caused. Abdullah longed to run after Aurora, to drop to his knees and beg her to understand. But he knew she needed space, and he wouldn't deny her that. So he stayed rooted to the spot, his fists clenched at his sides, praying silently that she might come back, that she might see the love behind his flawed choice. In the quiet room, Aurora wiped her tear-streaked face, forcing herself to breathe slowly. Her thoughts began to settle, though her heart still felt raw. She thought of Abdullah, not the man who lied, but the man she had come to love. His kindness, his humor, his unwavering strength, those parts of him were real, weren't they? Her fingers curled tightly around the fabric of her dress as she wrestled with her emotions. Yes, Abdullah had betrayed her, but their love, the laughter, the shared dreams, the connection that had felt so profound, that had been real. Aurora exhaled shakily, her mind torn. Could she forgive him? Could she rebuild what they had, knowing the foundation had been cracked? Outside the room, the faint sound of the call to prayer echoed through the air, a gentle reminder of faith, of resilience. And though Aurora didn't yet have the answers, she clung to one truth. Love was never simple, but it was always worth fighting for. The memories of their time together, the laughter, the heartfelt conversations, the way he had always supported her, felt undeniably genuine. Aurora had never been concerned about Abdullah's wheelchair, nor had she cared about his wealth. What mattered to her was his heart. The realization dawned on her gently, like the quiet waves of the Arabian Gulf brushing against the shore, softening her turbulent thoughts. Her feelings for Abdullah weren't rooted in his appearance or his circumstances. She loved him for his kindness, for the way he understood her in a way no one else ever had, for the fact that he saw her for who she truly was. Even amidst the lies, that truth remained steadfast. Her heart throbbed with a mix of pain and clarity, but deep within, she knew her love for him had not wavered. It wasn't about the wheelchair, nor was it about the money. It was about Abdullah, the man who had given her a love unlike any she had ever known. It was imperfect, but real. With newfound resolve, Aurora rose to her feet. Her chest still felt heavy, but her steps were steadier now. She had to face Abdullah, to speak with him, to lay her feelings bare. The anger and confusion still lingered, but they no longer consumed her. She needed to confront him, not to judge, but to understand. Taking a deep breath, Aurora re-entered the hall. The tension in the room was almost tangible as the guests turned their attention toward her. Murmurs rippled through the gathering, but she ignored them. Her focus was fixed entirely on Abdullah, seated at the edge of the stage, his face a mixture of guilt and hope. As she approached, the noise around her faded into a blur. When she stopped in front of him, her heart pounded loudly in her chest. She looked directly into his eyes and saw the deep regret and earnestness reflected back at her. "Why, Abdullah?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper but laced with emotion. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" Abdullah's throat tightened as he struggled to respond. "I was afraid, Aurora," he admitted, his voice thick with vulnerability. "I've been hurt before, used by people who only wanted me for my money or for what I could offer them. I didn't want to lose you because of that. I needed to know if anyone could love me for who I truly am, just Abdullah. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't know how to believe that this was real." Aurora's heart tightened as she heard his words. She understood now, even though the pain still lingered. He had been scared, just as she had been afraid of the doubts people had placed in her heart. In his own way, Abdullah had been searching for the same thing she had. Real love. "I wish you had trusted me," Aurora whispered, her voice thick with emotion as tears welled in her eyes again. "I always have. But it's hard. So hard to know what's real anymore." Abdullah stepped closer, his voice cracking. "What's real, Aurora, is my love for you. That's never changed. The man you fell in love with, the one who listens to you, who makes you laugh, the one who would do anything to make you happy. That's the real me. Everything else, the lie. I'm so sorry. If you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life making it right." Aurora looked at him, her heart torn, but also full of love. She had always believed in love, the real kind, and she had found it in Abdullah. The deception had stung, but the bond they shared was deeper than that. In that moment, she made her choice. "I love you, Abdullah," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "And I forgive you, but we need to rebuild the trust. We have to be honest with each other from now on." Abdullah's eyes welled with tears as he nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise, Aurora, no more secrets. I love you, and I'm ready to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." The guests stood in stunned silence, witnessing the raw sincerity of the moment. The priest, sensing the change in the air, stepped forward once more to continue the ceremony. With tears in their eyes, Aurora and Abdullah exchanged vows, their voices trembling with emotion. As they spoke their "I do's," it wasn't just a formality. It was a promise, a commitment to love each other, imperfections and all. And as they sealed their vows with a kiss, the room filled with the sound of applause. After their wedding, Aurora and Abdullah entered a life of fulfillment they had never dared to imagine. Together, they built a home filled with love, raising their children with care, compassion, and thoughtful guidance. Each day, they taught their kids not only patience and kindness, but also the importance of helping those around them. Though life had its challenges, Aurora and Abdullah found joy in giving back. They worked on charity projects, especially in the impoverished regions of the Middle East. These trips not only deepened their appreciation for the value of sharing, but also allowed them to teach their children lessons of empathy and selflessness. They created a family that was not only close-knit, but brimming with love, where their affection for each other extended to those in need. Their happiness wasn't just measured by the sweet moments they shared, but by the continuous acts of love they gave to others. This made their life even more complete, as they made a difference in the world, while nurturing their own bond. And there you have it, the beautiful journey of them. A love that overcame doubts, deception, and fears, ultimately blossoming into something far more meaningful. Their story is a testament to the power of trust, forgiveness, and the unwavering belief that true love is worth fighting for. As they continue to build a life filled with love, purpose, and compassion, they remind us all that sometimes the greatest adventure isn't about finding love. It's about nurturing it, sharing it, and making a difference in the world together. If you've enjoyed this heartfelt journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the beauty in real, raw love. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. And as always, thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, take care. and keep spreading love wherever you go.